Welcome back to my garden, albeit a slightly different spot. I've moved here partly because it's overcast, so the sun won't be in my eyes, but also because there's a little bit of ambient noise. School holidays tend to provide that. Let's just leave it at that. This week, in one of my multitude of newsletters that I receive, and don't worry, it's not Oliver Burkeman. This week it was James Clear. You may be aware of James Clear. He's a very well-known blogger and in particular found enormous success with his book Atomic Habits, which is a book I can't recommend enough. If you want something that covers all sorts of the latest thinking about habit formation and why it's important, I think it's as good as any that's out there. I signed up for his email, and he sends one which is, I think, called something like 321. So he gives 3 of his ideas, 2 quotes from other people, and 1 question to the readers. Very interesting, usually. And didn't disappoint this week. He quoted someone with this idea, and lots of people have said this, that we should ask ourselves how we can complete our 10-year goals in 2. Yes, and that's a popular one. I mean, I've heard Tim Ferriss quoting someone else, and they are a little bit more radical. It's, what would it take for you to complete your 10-year goal in 6 months? And these are very alluring because, well, why take 10 years to do something if with a little bit of innovative thinking, reimagining, you can accomplish it in 6 months? Surely that's much better. And it's not unlike an idea that I've discussed before, and I will repeat, padding out my video, apologies, but if you can remember hearing me talk about this before, but the rather notorious YouTube shyster Tai Lopez, he's done a TED talk where he suggests that very often people are going 1 kilometer south by heading north, and yes, they will get south eventually, but they've got to go around the whole world. And just listen to his clever hacks and you can get there much more easily, something like that. And in the video that I made, whenever that was, I suggested that my take on that is, yes, but imagine the journey you're missing out on, which I think is a fair question. And I suppose 10 years in 2 or 10 years in even more radically 6 months, well, it's a similar kind of argument, but I want to approach it in a more clear-cut sort of way. What is the problem with this idea? The problem is that I think what they're actually focusing on is 10 years accomplishments. How could you achieve this particular goal that you have set yourself for 10 years from now in 2 years? And therein lies the problem. We are focusing on the outcome rather than the process or the journey, which I think potentially is a little problematic. And I was thinking about what would be a good example, and it took my mind back to my days in living in London, teaching in London. We used to go to the Green Man, a very old, famous highwayman pub. And one of the characters there the craft design technology teacher from Elliott School, the irrepressible Andy England, who had he just had a style. I mean, for a start, he'd sit there, he had a bit of a paunch, he was a big stocky bloke, a bit of a paunch, and his quite thick glasses. And he would be wearing this hat, a sort of Australian bushranger hat, with little corks dangling from the rim. And his tipple of choice was pints of cider, Diamond White or some Strongbow or something. But he'd have it with a slice of lemon. But he'd use the same glass the whole evening. So by the end of the evening, there would be this glass of cider with a floating forest of lime slices on the top. I suppose you could keep count. And amongst his many interesting claims to fame was he'd been a powerlifting coach at one point. He'd done some powerlifting. He'd been a powerlifting coach, coached a British junior champion. And at the time, I was quite keen on going to the gym, and he'd ask me, how I was training and what I did. And we got onto the subject of bench press, and I was sort of saying I do a kind of a bench like 90 kilograms, thereabouts, 200 pounds. Never really managed to bench press more. And he said, well, would you like to? I said, I suppose so. I'm training. It's one of those things that maybe a bit of ego involved. You want to lift more. And he said, well, you're probably going about it the wrong way. I said, well, this is what I was doing. I explained, and I'd found a weight as much as I could lift, a solid set or two. And he said, no, look, if you want to improve, the way to do it is to dial back the weight until you find a weight that is a bit of a struggle to do 5 sets of 10, very strictly, no cheating, strict time intervals in between each set, and so forth. He said, and you just do this every bench press session that you have until you can do it comfortably. And then you lift he said, no. And then you add the smallest plate on the gym on either side. And you do this for 3 to 6 months and then see what you can lift. I thought, he's mad. But I did. I followed his advice. And 3 or 4 months later, there was a chap I knew who was a front row forward for Richmond Rugby Club. And we were doing a bit of training, and I thought he'd seen what I was doing, and we discussed and tested out, well, how much can you lift? And it was unbelievable. I could lift 120 kilograms. Before I'd started this process, I could lift 90. Now I could lift 120. It was a, 33% improvement without actually lifting a lot, just by doubling down on the slow, solid, methodical work, small increments. And I think that's been a very long-winded story, as long as a long-winded approach to bench press training. And perhaps if you're still out there listening, let me get back to the point. That's the point about the 10 years. You might be able to do the 10-year thing in 2 years. But this is the big question to ask. Not what am I gaining by accomplishing this in 2 years? Well, what you're gaining is obvious. You accomplish the thing that you thought would take you in 10 years in 2. Full stop. The question is, what is it costing you? What are you taking out of the equation? That long, slow route is maybe slow because it's inefficient, but maybe it's slow because it's just a slow process that will eventually yield sort of a sudden massive lift in performance. It really comes back to the idea that George Leonard talks about in Mastery. We must love the plateau. Grinding on the plateau suddenly leads to this extraordinary and unexpected improvement way further down the line, in a way that trying to continually improve, make big jumps and leaps forward, actually you're not doing the hard foundational work. And I got this email from James Clear, this newsletter, and strangely it tied in with what I'd been talking about in my chess blog video this week. I have a little chess blog. It's on a different channel. Perhaps I'll attach a link, but are you really interested in a blog about my chess? Well, maybe one of you is. Who knows? It can do no harm linking. The idea, in a nutshell, I was talking about how we try and improve our ability, tactical ability, by solving tactical problems. And if, like me, you solve them on a platform on the internet, you try and solve the problem as quickly as possible. Because it's on a clock and you get points the quicker you do it. So you do. But the truth of the matter is that in doing it quickly, you take shortcuts. You think in a more intuitive, not in as much as you're getting in touch with your intuition in creatively, but superficially. You think what looks like it should be the answer to the problem, rather than working out what is the answer to the problem. And sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong. And what I found in the last couple of months is that by trying to actually solve the problem, I take much, much longer, but I solve a lot more of them. And I think in the long run, it's going to benefit me in unimaginably good sorts of ways. Or maybe not, because I'm just beyond all hope and redemption. But I don't think so. I think it's really going to benefit me. And I suspect in much of what we do, this idea that how can I do it in 2 rather than 10? It's not unlike the Pareto principle. What yields 80% of the results with 20% of the effort, and let's just do that. Well, no, maybe the other stuff isn't yielding concrete results, but is contributing to something very important in a developmental sort of way. And all of these stories, the lifting weights, the 10 years in 2, the Pareto principle, the obsession with rating improvement in whatever shape it takes as a chess learner, all of these are examples, I suspect, of becoming hung up on the results. And in the productivity, self-development world, that may well be synonymous with money and fame. I think it's a fascinating question. What would happen if none of us became obsessed with those things? If we all just took a long-term view and a principled double down on what we value, and let's do that. Well, who knows? But it's interesting thinking about it. That's it for this week. As always, let me know what you think. Let's get a conversation going in the comments below, because frankly, I'm not really that worried about the likes and the number of comments, really. I say that, of course, it gives me a little buzz, but it doesn't matter. But having an interesting conversation does, so I'd love to hear from you. Until next week, and from my beautiful garden with the windmill in the background, although the pumping part of the windmill is broken, so it's just a garden ornament. Until next week, from an overcast Brazil. Ciao.